Thanks for tuning in to My Valley, His Victory, hosted by me, Mackenzie Smith, where I interview Christians who love the outdoors and have walked through valleys in their lives. In a world of highlight reels and surface-level relationships, we all have faced hardships. I believe our experiences can be encouraging to others if we have the courage to be vulnerable. 2 Corinthians 1 says, "The Father of compassion and the God of all comfort, who comforts us in all our troubles, so that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort we ourselves receive from God." My goal is to inspire you to come to the Creator through His creation and connect you with Christians who have been through similar experiences. I pray that this podcast encourages you if you are in a valley and pushes you to share how God has turned your past valley into His victory. This episode is brought to you by Highlander USA. Highlander USA is the adventure of a lifetime. It is a hiking event held in Big Bear, California, June 17th through 21st, with formats from 1 day to 5 days. If you are interested in hiking or backpacking and being around those who love the outdoors, look no further than Highlander. Use code KENZIE20 for 20% off your registration. I hope to see you there. On today's episode of My Valley, His Victory, we have Russell Reynolds. He is the host of Wildlife Outdoors Podcast, a single father, early in his walk with Christ, but on fire for Jesus. He connects with God through the outdoors, mainly fishing, camping, hiking, and kayaking. Thanks so much for being with us today, Russell.
Of course. Thank you for having me. I'm excited for this.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know I just read your short bio, but why don't you go ahead and just share with the listeners a little bit more about yourself and who you are?
All right. Yeah. Like you said, I'm Russell. I run the podcast Wildlife Outdoors. We are a wildlife podcast that focuses on conservation. We talk a lot about fly fishing, but we also venture into hiking, camping, kayaking, so on and so forth. But yeah, no, I love fly fishing. I love photography. I love videography. Single father and work full time as an engineer and just love being out in God's creation.
Yeah, absolutely. And you are based in Arkansas, is that correct?
Yes, I live just outside Hot Springs, Arkansas, in a little town called Royal. My co-host, Jose, he lives in Texas. That's where I grew up. I lived in Texas for 18 years, and that's where we met. And yeah, so we're kind of halfway based in Texas, halfway based in Arkansas.
Hey, that's cool that you guys figured out a way to do a podcast being in two different states.
Right.
So how long have you been in Arkansas?
I think a little over 5 years now, or maybe going on 6.
Okay. Very cool.
Yeah.
So is Arkansas a hot spot for fly fishing? Do you get to do your favorite hobbies there in Arkansas, or do you have to travel to do those things?
There's a lot of it here, but most of it isn't in my region. So I live in more of a warm water area. We have some trout stocked areas, and most people fly fish for trout. And so we have the White River and the Little Red River, which has numerous world records caught out of those two water systems. But those are about 3 to 4 hours north of me. And I live in an area, it's the Diamond Lakes region is what they call it. And so we have so many lakes and rivers in my area. So smallmouth is a big thing. And I love fly fishing for anything. I fly fish for carp and trout and bass and pickerel. And I've caught redfish on the coast and northern pike in Alaska. So I like fishing for weird stuff. So it works out great for me. But fly fishing isn't as big in my region as it is a little further up north.
Okay, very cool. And you mentioned you're an engineer. What kind of engineer?
Telecommunications.
Telecommunications.
So
okay.
Internet.
All right. Cables and wires and
yep.
maybe that kind of thing.
A lot of mainline design and drafting stuff and a lot of federal government grant projects going on and a lot of that stuff right now.
Okay. Very cool. So talk to us a little bit about the podcast. I know you gave us a little bit of information about it, but kind of where did that love start? Are one of you guys, do you do conservation, or in the past for a living? Does your partner do it? Kind of, yeah, just talk to us about how that got started and just what a listener could expect if they caught an episode.
Okay, yeah. So we've been doing it. So it's what, March 19th right now. April 28th will be our 2-year anniversary on doing this. The idea came when we were both, I think, freshmen in college. So 2011, we used to always just go out and end up hanging out with friends. And it was just him and I by the end of the night having conversations about dogs or wildlife or something like that. And we would just always just sit there and talk about stuff. And our friend group would move on and him and I would just sit there talking. And one day we just kind of said, hey man, we need to start a podcast. And 10 years went by of us saying that. And I had gone through a divorce and I sold my house in Texas. I was already living in Arkansas at the time. And I had a little bit of profit that I made from that. And I said, you know what? I'm just going to buy the stuff and I'm going to send it to him and we'll see if it goes. And that's where it started. We just said, we're finally going to do this. And so it's just a passion of both of ours. He actually does work in the industry. He has his master's in range and wildlife management, and then had done some work towards his PhD before he left and got a job. And so he also actually, unfortunately, just got let go with a lot of the federal cuts going on. He had a job with NRCS out of Texas. So he's kind of dealing with those trials right now. But yeah, so he works in the industry. I never have. I've just always been passionate about it. And we both love fishing. We both love wildlife. And we want to have a voice for those that can't speak for themselves, and unfortunately there's a lot of ballot biology, as we call it, where people that don't study these animals or study conservation or ecology have the ability to vote on certain things on emotion when they really don't know the science behind it. And there's been numerous cases where animals have, unfortunately got closer to extinction because laws that have been set in place, in terms of conservation. And so we want to be able to speak for those that can't speak for themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. That's sorry to hear that he's going through some of that stuff with everything that's going on, but I'm sure he'll end up on his feet and he'll find something that he's meant to do. And he's a believer,
so he knows that it's all in God's will and it's all in God's timing. So
yeah. Absolutely. So is fishing, is that kind of like your main thing? I know you've kind of said conservation. Do you hunt, fish, all the things, or is fishing kind of your thing?
So fishing historically has been my thing. I didn't grow up hunting. I grew up, with a single mother, and she wasn't really in my life much past, 14 years old. I think I've seen her 5 times in the past 17 years. So she's never really been a big part of my life, but she was the biggest part of my life growing up at a young age. And I never had a father around, so I never really got into hunting or anything like that. And fishing was just kind of more accessible living in Austin, Texas at the time. So I grew up kind of fishing. And then as I've gotten older, I'm like a late onset hunter. I'm really interested by it now. And I started hunting a lot this year. I did a lot of dove hunting, in college and stuff like that, but kind of starting to get more into the big game. But really fishing historically has been the thing that I've done the most. It's a little bit more accessible for me. I have a lot more knowledge about it than I do firearms. And I do have numerous rifles and shotguns, and I, have a compound bow. And so I'm getting out there a little bit more, but it's always been fishing, kind of rolling more into hunting. Jose did hunt and fish with his grandfather growing up. But he's always done a little bit more fishing than hunting, but we're both getting more into it.
Okay. Very cool. Yeah. I feel like those things, you usually do both of them, not always, but I feel like they kind of go hand in hand. And I think that it's cool that it's not something that you grew up doing, but you're getting out there and you're trying to figure it out now and learning a new skill. And yeah, just following that desire and that love for conservation and just the outdoors in that way. So it probably takes you into some new experiences and some different places, because I feel like, a lot of deer travel on rivers, but chances are you're going to have to go somewhere else to find them.
Yeah. So. Yeah, absolutely. I actually found a public land spot where I started hunting a lot this year. And ironically enough, it's on a river. And so it's public land that is basically between a river and almost like a suburb area. It's like 349 acres. And I was spending most of my time back closer to the river because that just felt more like home to me. So I ended up, finding quite a few trees that I could use my climbing stand over there along the river, so I could also look at the river and see what the fishing was like. And I found a couple spots that I need to go fish now that we're getting into spring. So kind of worked hand in hand there, but
that's funny. You're scouting for deer, but you're also scouting for fishing spots.
Oh, absolutely. Always got to keep your eyes open.
Oh, that's funny. So kind of talk to us about how being in the outdoors, being out on the water, fishing, hunting, whatever it is that you find yourself out there doing, maybe plays a role in your relationship with Christ.
Oh, it's plays a huge, huge role. There's just so much craziness and so much noise, both spiritually and physically, like in society now, especially when you work in an industry like me, where there's always something to do and it's ever changing. It has to do with technology. It gets hard to discern God's voice. And whenever I'm out in the woods and it's just so quiet, or I'm on the river, it's just so quiet, so peaceful. And that's my time with God. And I can discern, the goodness and the truth from God's word and from Christ, just from being out there. And I actually have a little story I'd like to share. One time that I was on the river, and so I'm very early in my walk with Christ. April, so I got baptized the day after my 31st birthday, and I'm not 32 yet, so I'm not even a year in, but I'm on fire for Christ. And I remember last spring, I had already gotten baptized, and I started trying to incorporate Christ in numerous aspects of my life. And I was listening to a podcast. I don't remember which one it was. It was probably like George Janko or something. And somebody was talking about praying out loud, that you don't always have to pray quietly. Sometimes it's good just to say it out. And I like to film my fishing trips, and I don't put very many YouTube videos out because I'm real hard on quality. And if it's not good enough for me, then I'm not going to post it. But I was out there with the intention of fly fishing for smallmouth bass on a river here in Arkansas, and I wasn't catching anything. And I was getting hard on myself. And this was like during the cicada hatch that was supposed to be epic last year. And I wasn't seeing any fish. I wasn't catching any fish. I was just getting kind of aggravated and not even enjoying my time on the river. But it was gorgeous. It was like 80 degrees. There was a slight wind. You could hear the cicadas. It was just a beautiful day. And I come around this bend, and I don't know what it was, but something reminded me of that podcast that I was listening to. And so I said, you know what? I'm not worried about filming. I'm not worried about content right now. I'm just going to be in the moment. And I go around this bend, and the river's just gently carrying me. And I come to this clearing, and it's just very calm water. And there's these like ripples on the edge. And then it goes to these shoals that are a little bit further down. And I said, you know what? I'm just going to stand up and pray. So I just stood up. I'm out there all by myself, and I just prayed out loud and just thanked God for having me there and giving me these experiences and keeping me healthy. And I was just very thankful in this prayer. I didn't pray for anything. I just prayed to pray. And I felt this immense peace come over me. And I sat down, and I picked up my fly rod and just, flopped my fly out on the water. Next thing I know, top water hit, takes off, start fighting it. It is my personal best smallmouth bass that I've ever caught. And I was just like I literally just prayed for this, like not even expecting anything from it. Like it wasn't transactional. I was just, I was being real hard on myself, and I wasn't enjoying myself in this beautiful place in God's creation. And then after praying, I got that. Well, then almost every other cast after that, in this one hole, I caught fish after fish after fish. I caught 8 species in this hole, one of which was a 4-foot spotted gar, which I've never caught on the fly before. And I mean, it was just an amazing experience just out there in God's creation. And I started to realize at that point that no matter what is going on, you can be thankful, but sometimes you'll get something from it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I feel like we have talked about this. It comes up time and time again somehow, and, talking about praying out loud on this podcast. And I think there is just something so special. And I think, for me, when I think about my own personal journey and the times that I pray aloud, it's usually like I don't have something that I'm actually like praying for or seeking. It's just like I want to talk to God. Usually when I pray in my head, it's like, hey, God, I really need something, it seems like more in those moments. But when I take the time to actually speak out loud, it's just like wanting to have a conversation, just being thankful, some of those things that you said, and just there's something powerful about it. I don't know what it is, and I don't know why it works that way, but I just feel the same thing that you said, like just so grateful and so, thankful in those moments for the time that I'm having and the just situation. And I think it also like puts us in a posture, because you weren't having a good time. You sat here and you're like, thank you, God, for, just this place. And now you're in a better attitude about it moving forward.
Absolutely.
And so it's just sometimes even like good just to check yourself. Like it's going to help you be more grateful or get you out of a funk, right. When you're not sitting there thinking about the negative. So.
Exactly. And as humans, that's just something that we do. We live in a world where, and then in the secular world, the enemy is afoot, and he comes to, destroy our happiness and our joy. And Just as humans, we tend to kind of lean that way naturally. And of course, there's optimistic people and pessimistic people, but just walking on this earth, we have a tendency to be a little more negative. So
yeah, absolutely. So, Russell, I know you kind of just shared a story with us, but do you have another story that comes to mind about a way in which God has revealed himself to you through the outdoors?
We'll be back after a quick break.
What's up, guys? Steve here with the Balance of Gray podcast. Do you ever feel like sermons skip the chapters you're living in?
What?
Like church turned into a TED Talk after a concert? Well, at the Balance of Gray, we ask real questions, wrestle with real doubts, and yeah, we leave room for some laughs along the way.
Ooh.
But make no mistake, prophecies are unfolding, and this isn't dress rehearsal. It's the final act. The gospel isn't a vibe, it's a rescue plan. And lukewarm doesn't cut it. From scientific proof to spiritual warfare, this is where faith is not blind. Search The Balance of Gray wherever you get your podcast and hit follow now. That's The Balance of Gray podcast. I'll see you soon.
Phenomenon is what it is.
Yeah, like looking back on my childhood, so I did have kind of a rough childhood, and I've shared this on my podcast. It's funny looking back now, but it could have been really bad. That how I really got introduced to exploring the outdoors by myself was I was getting away from the violence at home, and I was living in Austin, Texas, on the north end of Austin, Texas, and I was just walking to a creek off of, I want to say it was Metric Boulevard or something, and this older gentleman was staying under the bridge and came up and struck a conversation with me, and we got to talking about fishing, and I must have been 8 years old, maybe 9 years old. And he was telling me about how he's going through a divorce and all sorts of like sharing his life with me, which is very strange looking back now as an adult. And the next day or a couple days later, he was there again, and he had this fishing pole. It was a Shakespeare fishing pole from like Walmart. That he said, "Oh, I have an extra. You can have it." And he gave it to me. Luckily, nothing happened, but that is how I started going out and fishing this little Walnut Creek is what it was called. And there was a goldfish someone had released in there that I tried to fish for forever and never caught it. But I just was out there catching brim, and that's kind of how I started getting more into it. And now that I'm in my walk with Christ, like I look back and I found my solace in nature to get away from the violence at home. But now I realize like that is where I could always discern, the truth and the joy and everything that was good in life. And it wasn't until now that I realized that was Christ. Like that's God's creation, and that's where I was, and that's where I felt joy. That's where I felt at peace. At that time, I just thought I was getting away from BS at home. But now that I'm deeper in my walk with Christ, like that was Christ with me this whole time. And throughout my life, I've been through a lot of hardships, and I tended to look at myself like a victim, like, oh, why did this happen to me? And then I would kind of turn and be like, okay, well, I must have done something to make this happen. I'm just not going to do that again and move on, and never really dwelled on stuff. But I always kind of had that thought, like, why is this always happening to me? Or why did this situation happen to me? But everything's in God's will and everything happens for a reason. And I guess I just never really thought about, didn't have the knowledge of Christ back then. And now that I do, it's like, oh, he was with me the whole time. And that's why I always felt peace and joy when I was out in the woods or on the creek or on the river or on the lake, whatever the case may have been.
Yeah. Yeah. Was that guy, was he homeless or was he just there often fishing?
I don't know. He said that what he shared with me, and keep in mind I was a kid, he shared with me that he was going through a divorce and his wife didn't want him home. How true that was, I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah.
But still, just like for, I think that there's just something about that story. Like there's somebody who's going through a really hard time, somebody who is in the midst of, despair and, is having a really hard time with himself, but yet he's kind enough to give a little kid a fishing pole. And like, it's just, I think it's just like, it's just a sweet story. And like, I think that there's something special about that, and like someone, kind of like coming alongside you and like being kind to you, and especially, being in the situation that you said you were trying to like escape, some things going on at home. And so to just like have that like little bit of love shown to you, I'm sure was super special at the time.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's so true what you said just about how you can look back on your journey now. And, in the moment you didn't know that God was with you, right? You didn't even maybe know who God was.
Yeah.
But you can look back on your story and you can see all of these things and how it was like leading up to everything that is going on now.
Absolutely.
And you can see God's faithfulness or, God's hand in certain things. And I think that's so true. And I can relate to that with my own story. I came to know the Lord at 25. And so I can just see all of these things where he was just like edging me into, this path. And I sure didn't see it at the time and sure wouldn't have, given the kudos to God for some of those things, but he really, really is using everything, and it doesn't make sense in the moment, but you can, hindsight's 2020. You can see how all of those things were just edging you in. So
pointing you where you needed to go.
Yeah. And even like, getting you to a place where, some people's stories, this was my story, pushing me to a place where I needed God, because before I didn't need God. I was good, I thought I had it figured out. And so God actually had to like kind of humble me and chop me down and be like, no, you don't.
Yeah.
And so, sometimes it's that too. And you wouldn't know that unless you come to know how much you really need the Lord. So.
Exactly.
So I know you live in Hot Springs, Arkansas, right outside of Hot Springs, which I wouldn't consider an urban environment. I know you grew up in Austin, so that's probably way more of that urban environment, but kind of talk to us about how listeners can start to connect with God through creation on an everyday basis versus, being out on these awesome fishing trips or, whatever the case may be, because those are great and we love those times, but we maybe can't get to those things every day.
Yeah. I mean, when I was in Austin, it was, Walnut Creek off of Metric Avenue or Metric Boulevard. It's a pretty urban area, and I was able to find my own little piece of, wilderness there, a city park or anything like that. Sometimes it's even when you're sitting in traffic on the interstate, rolling the windows down and getting some fresh air and just thinking about God and just being in the moment on his in his creation, whether you are in an urban area or you are in the woods or, even in the suburbs. Like when I lived in San Marcos, Texas, I lived in the suburbs. It's about 45 minutes south of Austin, between Austin and San Antonio. And we had these trails. They were completely paved trails. They were like 6 or 8 foot wide, and they built them that way so people could drive their go-karts within the neighborhood and stuff like that. And there really isn't much wildlife. You'd see squirrels and birds, but really nothing else. But it used to be a ranch. They built that subdivision on what used to be a ranch. And so occasionally you'd see the deer, but just being out in his creation, even if it's in your neighborhood or sitting in traffic, roll the windows down, get some fresh air. I'm lucky enough to where I'm kind of out of all that and I don't have to worry about all the hustle and bustle of the city. I do work in some bigger areas. I work in Longview, Texas, and Little Rock, Arkansas, and Pine Bluff, Arkansas, Vicksburg, Mississippi. And those areas aren't really, suburban. They're kind of more like cities. But I can still find places to be in nature, even if I'm not really in nature, and think about God's creation and just experience it that way.
Yeah, absolutely. If you're sitting in traffic, roll down your windows and breathe in that fresh air. I love it.
Yeah. Which I know in Texas, it's hard. I mean, middle of summer, it's 115 degrees. You want the windows up and the AC on. But yeah, sometimes it's even, or just taking a walk right before, dinner or something, even if it's just to go check the mail or, I mean, that's something that we used to do. We'd walk out and our mailbox wasn't too far, but we'd take the kids and we'd just go for a walk and we'd walk past the mailbox, turn around at the end of the street, come back, just spend some time out there.
Yeah. So. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Russell, switching into the title of this podcast, My Valley, His Victory, would love for you to share a valley or a season of wilderness that you experienced and just what maybe God taught you or prepared you for in that season.
Yeah. So like I said earlier, I've been through quite a few things in my childhood, a lot of which I haven't spoke about, but some very difficult situations, life-threatening situations, a lot of situations that a child shouldn't be in, much less have their parents put them through. And I kind of always looked at myself like a victim-ish, but it wasn't until I was older. I was, 28, 29, and I had already been divorced and had, kids, and I started dating this woman, which was essentially the one that led me to Christ. And we, I started going to the same church with her just because I wanted to spend time with her. I'd never really been a church goer, and her family always went to church, and I just wanted to spend more time with her. So I started going to church, and just kind of, I became almost like a lukewarm Christian. I didn't really know the gospel. I didn't really know Jesus. I knew who Jesus was, and I went to church every Sunday, but I didn't really know much. Didn't, do a lot of Christian things. I didn't live my life as a Christian. Didn't call myself a Christian. I wasn't a bad person, I don't think, but I wasn't really living as a Christian. And as that relationship started to decline, I just felt like I was just in this major valley. I was never in a good mood. I was depressed. I was physically hurting. My stomach was constantly hurting. I never really got sick growing up. And there was a period towards the end of that relationship that for 3 weeks straight, I was just vomiting for no reason. Like I would just get really nauseous and just throw up. Like I was just in a physically just horrendous place, emotionally horrendous place. And then this relationship ended, and that relationship ending hurt me more than my marriage ending did. Like I was just in this extremely low place, and her and I had joined a life group through the church. And literally, I think it was a day or two after we had broken up, we'd just gotten back from vacation together. And I was still wanted to go to this life group, and she said she wasn't going to go. So I walked in, and the leader of the group said, "Oh, you're alone today," because her and I had been going together, and he didn't know what had happened. And I just broke down. I started weeping, and he just hugged me. And I've never really had, another man be there for me like that emotionally. And he just walked me outside away from everybody else, so I wasn't embarrassed. And he just talked to me for 10, 15 minutes asking what was going on. And I told him, and I just felt better. And so I went in and continued this class. And it wasn't until that point that I was going through this class that I really started diving into the word and started listening to the lessons. And I was going through so much hurt because of the situation, and it was a relationship that was ending, and I was getting pretty close with her family, and I don't have a big family myself. And the family that I do have is in Texas or in Alaska, so I don't get to see them. So not only was I losing this relationship, I felt like I was losing a family, and I was just in this very low place until I started spending time in the Word and started realizing that even though I was in a low place, I was going through this for a reason. And I honestly, truly believe that she was put in my path to lead me to the Lord. And that definitely happened. And now it's at a point where, okay, I was hurt, but I can see why I went through that and why I felt so low for what it was. I mean, it was a relationship. We didn't even date 2 years, and we weren't married. We weren't engaged, anything like that. But it hurt me so low, and I feel like I had to be brought to that position. I had to be put down there emotionally for me to understand what true love is. I had to be that low to know what the joy and the glory and just everything that Christ has for me. I would have never known if I wasn't taken that low. And now, even like I'm past it now, I'm way over it, but even in the time that I was still hurt, like I still felt joy, like my sickness went away. Like the second that I got baptized, my entire life has changed. I haven't had heartburn. I wasn't sick anymore. I wasn't getting headaches. I had more energy. I wanted to be more active with my kids. Like my entire life was just way different, even though I was still hurting. And at the time I did miss her, I just had this new energy that I'd never felt before. And I feel like I was made to go through that valley. I was made to meet her. She was made to bring me to Christ. And then she was made to go off and do her own thing. And now I'm on a completely different trajectory in my life. And the podcast has been doing better since then. I've been, there with my kids, and my career's been going well. Just things have been astronomically better in every situation in my life after that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, one, thank you just so much for sharing that and kind of walking us through that season, because relationships can be really hard, and they can create, major emotional sadness and hurt and all the things. Like, I think that we are so built for, having relationship with people. And so whenever those things don't go well, they definitely take a toll on us. And I think that it's interesting that, you you started going to church because you were just like, I just want to spend more time with this girl, and which is just cool. I think God works in different people's lives in different ways. And so it's like, that's how he got you into the church was, by having you date some girl. But then I think that it's really cool that you stuck with it. Cause I think a lot of times, people will do that and they'll be like, oh yeah, I'll go while I'm dating this person, or I'll do this to appease this, but they're not actually there for the right reasons. And so I think that, that's exactly what happened in your story is once you kind of hit that low point, it was like, oh, like I actually need this place.
Yeah.
And then, you had a journey from there, and that's how you really came to know the Lord. I think what you said something along the lines of like, you had to get to that super low place in order to experience true joy and true love and all of those things. And I think that just reminded me of, you can't have one without the other, in order for there to be like true love, like there has to be the opposite and extreme, the extreme opposite. Yeah. And so in order to have these really high things, there's also, the other end of the spectrum. And so, if I feel like we just like coast in this like middle line, it's like, yeah, we have these little ups, little downs, but you like never really experience the high or the lows without experiencing, one or the other.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's those extreme opposites. I kind of just would love to hear you share about, you walked into that small group totally upset, someone asked you what was going on. You have mentioned, that you didn't really grow up with a father. Mm-hmm. I can just assume that, you had also said, you'd never really had a man to like, lead you or guide you or comfort you. Mm-hmm. How did you go about like opening up to that person? And like, what was that experience like? Because I think a lot of times what I've heard, and maybe you can, talk about this too, is like when you don't have a good idea of what a father is, it can be really hard to like trust God because, the Bible uses so much fatherly language. Mm-hmm. And so just like navigate that for us a little bit, if that makes sense at all, what I'm asking.
Yeah, it does. So I didn't have a father growing up. When I was about 10, my mom started dating a man that I call my dad now. And he has been a godsend, and he is as active into my life as he can be. He was a long haul truck driver, and now he is a senior supervisor at like loading docks and stuff like that for wind farms. And so he's not home a lot, but he's always there. And so I have had a male figure in my life through my teens and into my adulthood that was there if I needed him. I was never the kind to reach out and ask for stuff, but if I needed him, he was there. So I kind of had a little bit of understanding of knowing that somebody's there, but not there, which I guess kind of, is how God is. Like he's always there, but you can't always see him, Yeah. So I've had an understanding of that, but it was definitely different having a man be there physically and to console me because I'd never experienced that. And he was just very patient, very kind. And I don't know what it was that just allowed me to open up. And I just blatantly told him like, yeah, no, her and I broke up. And I'm just really going through it, and it hurt more than my divorce. And I told him that, and he, used scripture. I can't remember exactly what he told me, but he used scripture, and it spoke to me, and it kind of brought me to a level to where I was like, okay, I'm going to go into this class and I'm going to continue. And then we had been going through a section in this small group talking about forgiveness and letting stuff go and living in freedom with Christ. And I guess I was holding resentment towards my childhood and how my mother had raised me. And every time we were talking about forgiveness and, stuff like that and resentment, I always just thought about my mom. I never thought about the resentment I was holding in the relationship that I was in. And it wasn't until that class that a lot of the things we started talking about started pointing to my relationship. We went over, 1 Corinthians, and it's talking about love is patient, love is kind. And I started realizing like all the stuff that love is, like I haven't been as a significant other. And so I started realizing like maybe all this resentment I'm holding is in my relationship currently that I'm in this chapter of my life, and not really my mom that I've seen 3 times in the past 16 years at the time. Like it's, I wasn't really holding resentment on that. I was holding resentment on what I was living through at that time. And so I started letting go of all that and getting past the resentment and actually healing and learning how to live in freedom with Christ. But it was amazing having him there to help me through it, because he knew scripture and he just knew the right things to say, whether it was him or it was a spirit working through him. He just knew the right things to say and the direction to point me. And the next 3 weeks of class after that, leading up to the conference that they have at the end of that class, was just, everything was just hitting the nail on the head. And it resonated with me, and it just made me on fire more. And I got devotionals, and I started listening to Christian music, and I started listening to Christian podcasts, and it ramped up everything leading to that conference. And then that conference was a Friday and Saturday. And I went in Friday kind of like, if they do baptisms, like I might do it. Like I'm feeling this Christian thing is pretty cool. You know, I have people that care about me, and they've showed that they care about me, and this is pretty cool, you know? And I was just kind of on the fence. I was like, I might get baptized. And after going through the Friday evening section of that conference, I was like, oh, I'm all in. Like I'm getting in that water tomorrow. Like there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And so we go through the day, and the conference is pretty intense. Like you come to face with everything that you've been through in life, and you leave it all behind. And the whole purpose of it is to walk in freedom. And at the end of the second day, I was just like, yeah, I'm getting baptized. And my kids were there. And so I went and got them, and I'm shaking as we're getting up. And I think we had probably 20 something, 25, maybe even 30 people get baptized that day. And I was kind of in the middle of the pack, and my kids were out there, and some new friends that I'd made through the class were there, and they were filming and taking pictures as I went in. And I just, openly proclaimed that Jesus is my Lord and Savior. And they dipped me, and I came up, and I just hear my youngest daughter say, "Daddy, I'm so proud of you." And she runs to the front of the auditorium and just embraces me. And I'm soaking wet. And she was, I think she was 6. She was 6, and she just yelled top of her lungs, she's so proud of me, and ran to me. And it just made me feel amazing. And she convicts me a lot. She is just she knows God at a young age, and she knows what's wrong and what's right. And I'm a sinner. I do things I shouldn't, and I say things I shouldn't, and she's always on me about it. And she convicts me like every day. There's something that she's convicting me about. And she's just so precious. And her saying that she's proud of me and running to me and embracing me even when I'm soaking wet, like that's just, it was amazing. And then just feeling the grace and the joy and the peace and everything. It was just, I came out of that water a brand new man, and I'm not going back.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I'm like emotional. I'm like, I would have been weeping. I would have been weeping.
I was.
Oh, that's just so cute. And I think it's really cool that, you said like your daughter, your 6-year-old, 7-year-old, however old she is now, like daughter is the one that's convicting you, like she's bringing to light things, and it's God using her, of course, but it's crazy to think that, someone so young can make an impact in somebody's life, especially on like a spiritual level. I think we think like, oh yeah, elders and older people and people to disciple me. And it's like, sometimes you just need to pay attention to your relationships and the people that are around you on an everyday basis. But yeah, thank you for sharing that kind of just journey and that conference and kind of just all the things that kind of led up to that moment. I would love to just kind of hear, from you, a word of advice or a piece of encouragement for someone who, you said you were 31 when you got baptized. Coming to faith at an older age can be challenging. You have this life you've been living. You have this history of your past. You have some maybe habits and things that are active, and it's like, oh man, like I got to change my life. And so just for someone who's, coming into the faith and kind of is like, how could I ever change? Or I want to come to know the Lord, but I have all this, stuff or whatever it is, like someone's in that, or they're just accepted the Lord, but their life, looks a little different. Like, just what advice or word of encouragement would you give to that person navigating that new season?
We'll be back after a quick break.
Exhausted by performance-based Christianity? The Signpost Inn podcast is your spiritual oasis. Each episode guides you from knowing about God to experiencing His loving presence. Find peace, clarity, and companionship for your spiritual journey. The Signpost Inn podcast blends theological depth with practical wisdom and helps you lift your gaze from life's chaos to Jesus' face. The Signpost Inn, that's INN, podcast is where rich theology meets compassionate spirituality. Available wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts.
I would say don't be intimidated. I mean, everybody has a starting place. I've done a lot of things in my life that I would have never thought I would be a Christian. And I have been told by Christian friends of mine that they have seen major changes in my life, and they never wanted to be the pushy type of Christian, because there's a lot of people that have pushed people away from Christ because they have that holier than thou and that mentality that like, oh, I'm better than you. You shouldn't do that. What you're doing is wrong. You need to repent. And that pushes some people away. Some people need to hear that, but some people don't. And one thing I liked about the course that I went through that kind of started leading me in the direction I am now is they explained that Jesus meets you where you're at. And one of the big things that they did is, 15 minutes a day with God. And that was 5 minutes of prayer, 5 minutes of reading the Bible, and 5 minutes of worship music or worshiping in one way or the other. And I started to find that wasn't enough time for me. Like 5 minutes is a song and a half. And you start getting into Christian music. I mean, there's Christian rap, there's Christian rock, there's Christian metal, there's hymns, there's gospel, there's R&B. Like there is everything you can think of in terms of Christian music that can relate to the kind of music that you like. And 2 songs just isn't enough for me. And so it started with more worship music. And then it started going to, well, I'm curious about what this says in the Bible and what this says in the Bible. And then I got to study Bible. And it's like, okay, well, I'm reading this. Well, now it's referring to this. I got to go read that. And so then the 5 minutes of music wasn't enough. The 5 minutes of reading wasn't enough. And then you start getting better in your prayer life, and it becomes a little less awkward because when you're learning how to pray, you don't know how to talk to, an omnipotent being that you don't physically see or physically hear. It's kind of awkward at first. And then you start realizing like you have this conversation with God and you feel better. And so I just started noticing that 15 minutes isn't enough for me. And so now I pray a lot more and I read a lot more and I listen a lot more. And so everybody has to start somewhere, but also remember that Jesus didn't come for the healthy. Jesus didn't come for the rich. He came for the weak. He came for the poor. You don't go to a doctor when you're feeling the best of your life. You go to the doctor when you're sick, and that's just, he comes to meet you where you're at. And to show you that there's way more to life and that there's this joy and there's this peace. And I can't imagine my life without Jesus now, but you just have to start somewhere. Even if it's, 5 minutes a day, 15 minutes a day, he's going to meet you where you're at.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I like that. I think that's really good. He's going to meet you where you're at, and you don't need to clean yourself up or get your stuff together, like to come to know him. I know that was something I really struggled with when I came to know the Lord. It was like my friend, kept asking me, like, are you ready to declare? I'm like, no, like I still have all these things I need to fix. And she's like, that's not how it works, Kenzie. Yeah. So I think that's really good. He's going to meet you where you're at. And I think, in your story specifically, but I think it's so true in anything in our life, like what you feed will grow in your life. And so, like you said, you're going to have more hunger for the things that you do, good or bad. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like there's a reason people become alcoholics. You like drinking, you're going to drink more. The more you drink, the more you're going to drink. The more you're going to want to drink. It works the same way and the opposite way. The more you read the Bible, the more you lean into God, like the more you're going to desire those things. And so you got to start somewhere, and you got to sometimes like recalibrate those desires. But once you start doing it, the hunger will definitely come. And
it will.
I think it's cool to see, you're like, I got to the point where 5 minutes wasn't enough. Like I need more. I want more. And I think that's how we all, like, our posture should be. We should just want more of God all the time. Yeah. But we also have to focus on him. to make that and not focus on the world. Because if we focus on the world, we're going to want more of the world. If we focus on God, we're going to want more of God.
Exactly. And one thing that I can say on that too is don't be scared of the work, because you're not doing the work. The Spirit is doing the work. Jesus is working through you. You're not physically doing the work. And you mentioned, well, I have so much more things I need to clean up before I can declare. No, that's not how it is. If you declare, it will come, because we're not saved by our works. Our works are rubbish to God. It is us opening up the door for the Spirit to work in us and for Jesus to do the work. And the same thing where if you get to a point where you want to start speaking, the gospel to others, it's not our job to lead people to Christ. It's our job to plant the seed, and God does the rest. So it's not about works for your salvation. It's just trusting and having faith and understanding that I am a sinner. I'm a human. I'm always going to be a sinner. There's only been one man that's lived a perfect life, and that was Jesus. But if I can do what I can to show that I have faith in him, he will work through me and lead me the way that I need to be led. And your fruits will come from that. It's not the work that you have to do. You just need to be open and allow him to work through you.
Preach it, Russell. Preach it. Preach it. Keep going. Keep going. Oh, no, that's so true. And I think so often, I know that's a place where I get stuck when, it's like time to share the gospel with somebody. It's like, well, what if they don't, whatever? What if they ask me a question that I don't know the answer to? And it's like, it's not my job. I'm here to plant the seed and to be obedient. God will handle the rest.
Exactly.
But I think so often we like to take those things on. It's like, no, we have to convince them, or we have to, whatever. And it's like, no, God's doing the work. I like what you said. We're just planting the seed, and you never know, that's the fun thing about the seed analogy. Whenever you plant a seed, you don't know which seed's going to grow. Not all of them grow.
Exactly.
Some of them die, and you just never know which one's going to finally break through the surface. And so you got to plant more.
Exactly. And I mean, sometimes do you know who the Robertson family is, the Duck Dynasty family?
Yes, of course.
So have you seen The Blind, the movie?
Yes.
Okay. So I went through a small group where we read the book Gospeller by Willie Robertson, and then he references the movie, and we watched the movie as well.
It's a good book.
And I mean, that's one of the things where, it took 3 decades for the seed to take hold, and it took his sister to send a pastor to his bar that he owned to speak to him, and that still didn't even do it.
Yep.
But sometimes it takes a while, but there's nothing wrong with planting that seed.
Yeah.
God will do the work.
Yeah. It's definitely a good movie. If you guys haven't watched it, go watch The Blind and Gospeller. I have that one on my shelf. My husband was reading it, and
that's a great book.
I haven't read it yet, but I've heard it's really good. But I know
it's a really good read.
Yeah, I know if it's from them, it's got to be pretty solid. So
yeah, it is.
Oh well, Russell, for those listening who maybe want to follow along with you, find Wildlife Outdoors podcast, all the things, where can they do that?
We are anywhere you can find a podcast. We are video on Spotify and YouTube. You can just look up Wildlife Outdoors podcast. We're also on Apple Music, and I think you can even tell Amazon Alexa to look at Wildlife Outdoors, and I think it comes up that way. We're on everything, every platform. Instagram, we're at wild.life.outdoors. We're on Facebook at Wildlife Outdoors. On YouTube, we have the Wildlife Outdoors podcast, and then we also have Wildlife Outdoors, which is more of an adventure channel. Trying to get more into the documentary style stuff, and that's coming, but I have a couple camping videos, fishing videos. I think I'm dropping a goose hunting video here soon, catch and cook type of thing. So just you can find us anywhere. Just look up Wildlife Outdoors or Wildlife Outdoors podcast. Yeah.
And what about if they want to connect with you and on the podcast?
Yep. My handle is at Russ Reynolds Hook'em on Instagram. It's also in the Wildlife Outdoors Instagram page. You can find me there, or just look me up, Russell Reynolds on Facebook, and reach out. And I love talking to new people, especially people all over the world that have listened to podcasts I've been on or ones that I've put out, and just love hearing from people. So don't be shy to reach out.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Russell, for being here and for sharing your story, and just for being so on fire for the Lord and just taking this new season of life and running with it. I think that is super cool. I think the new place is where people can either get stuck or they can thrive. And so I just love whenever people are unashamed of just living living up this new season of life, and just so thankful that you're here and that you shared this story.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed it.
Thanks so much for listening to this week's episode of My Valley, His Victory. If you or someone you know are interested in being on this podcast, please email myvalleyhisvictory@gmail.com.